Hi, everyone. This is Dr. V, and welcome to this episode of Inner Circle. We have a wonderful guest today, and I just want to introduce you real quick. Her name is Caroline, and she is with the Healthy Home. She is a healthy home remediation specialist. And I probably just completely butchered that. Why don't you tell us, Caroline, a little bit about exactly what you do, or like the actual title that you use, because I know what you do. But for our audience, tell us a little bit about exactly what you're doing, because I know we've got a really interesting conversation that I want to jump into with you today.
Yeah, it's always fun to jump in the conversation right away. But I'm Caroline Blazovsky. I'm considered America's healthy home expert. I'm a national home expert across the country, and I examine homes. I'm a house detective, if you will. I go in and look at really what's going on in your home to find out why you're sick, to prevent you from being sick, and to see what might be causing any type of health symptom that you may be having. So we're looking at all kinds of things. We're looking at mold, we're looking at radon, we're looking at VOCs, building performance, and just kind of assessing your homes for health. Basically, that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wasn't that wasn't coming out right. So this is what I'm so excited about. What it is that you do. When I learned about what you were doing, and you had reached out to me, this is really such an important topic because what we're doing on our end is working with the individuals and uncovering what toxins are in their body that are at the root causes. And I say root causes, and I'll tell you why in just a minute, that are at the root causes of their symptoms, conditions, and diseases. Because we're seeing a higher number of people around the world, not just in the United States, but people around the world now who are struggling with chronic symptoms, conditions, and diseases. And they're not finding answers and solutions. And they're sicker now than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And they're trying to figure out what's going on. And, quite frankly, I'm finding it very alarming that we're seeing such a stark rise in neurodegenerative diseases and other diseases that are ultimately killing people slowly, is basically what's going on. Because the medical community, the Western medicine community, they have no answers and solutions for any chronic disease. And so these people, are basically being told, well, there's nothing that we can do, but here's some medication that might make you feel better. Oftentimes, these medications are making them actually feel worse. They'll start on one medication. 5 or 10 years later, they're on 10 or 15 different medications, taking one medication for the symptom that was caused by the previous medication, and it just spirals downhill. And then on top of all of that, we're seeing a stark rise in the chronic illnesses and diseases, in particular mental health and autoimmune diseases that are starting in kids as young as 5 years old.
Mm.
And so, learning about what you are doing and how you are a crusader for people's health by teaching them and going into depth, teaching them what is in their homes and what they're being exposed to in their environment that's making them sick. This is just a perfect fit for the work that we're doing. And so I'm just super excited to have you here with us today.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm super excited to be here too. The synergy is amazing. Divine intervention, as we discussed a little bit, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's no accident about that. Um, Tell us a little bit about how you got into this type of work. Where was your background, and why are you doing this type of work today? Because being an advocate and being on the boards of these different companies, and these, and doing all of the work that you're doing, it's not an easy task out there. So tell us a little bit about how you developed this passion.
No, it's not easy. And I think in the same, and you can relate to this too. I think anytime you're bucking what is normal, right? I'm putting my fingers up in quotes and people can't see me, but anytime you're going against the grain on something, it's always challenging. And I think that's how you kind of know sometimes when you really are onto something, because everyone's going in one direction and you're going in another. But these are things like what we're teaching people. I mean, even when you go to med school, I went out to the University of Southern California. And when I was at Keck, they taught us about the importance of environment in public health and epidemiology. Like they teach it the right way. And then what happens is when you're becoming a doctor, you learn the right methodology, you learn what causes these diseases, and then you get out into the real world and suddenly you've got to keep the lights on, right? You have to pay the bills. You've got to keep your practice open. And big pharma comes knocking and says, "Hey, we've got some great products for your clients that'll help." And I think people all go into it with the right intention. So I like to say that as I think medicine's trying to do the right thing. It's just in any industry, in ours too. I can talk to you about remediators who take people for money all the time. That money starts to talk, and when it talks, it's very powerful, and it tries to dictate people in the wrong direction if you let it. So, but what we're trying to do is actually bring people back to the environment, bring them back to what we know that environment causes the problem, and actually find out what's causing it, right? Like just get into your home or your workplace and say, look, where are you exposed to carcinogens? How can we remove them? Whether it's heavy metals, bacteria. I mean, there's so many things we can talk about. And I like to talk about cases because I think it's interesting to your clients.
Yeah, well, you know what? That's exactly what we do. So, you know, I used to have a brick and mortar, a traditional brick and mortar functional medicine practice. And we have evolved so greatly since then because we also believe that the long-term answer is empowerment and education. We really moved away from the traditional functional medicine practice, which is, doctor patient model, right? Which is very disempowering to the patient. And I'm not saying that there are not times where we need that doctor patient model, right? But in in this case of helping people understand chronic illness where the western medicine model really has no answers, it's not surgery. When it's surgical related, if you break your leg and you need to go in and get surgery, or you have something like that happen, the doctor patient model serves very, very well. You've got the expert and
Correct.
you got the patient,
Mhm.
and the patient is going to go, doctor, help me, and the doctor's going to go, don't worry, I can take care of this. But that model doesn't work for preventative, and it's not working for chronic illness. And so we shifted away from the brick and mortar model. And we went into more from the brick and mortar doctor patient model, and we shifted into an education model. So we're doing what you're doing. And we're intersecting beautifully. In addition, we are also showing case studies. So we've been collecting data, lab data from our clients around the world for about 5 years now. And when we're able to show, I mean, this was great. This was exciting for us too, because as we started doing this, we were doing what most practitioners out there are not doing. We were doing frequent testing with people so that we could see if if we find mold in your body, we're not just going to put you on XYZ's mold protocol and then cross our
Right.
fingers and then hope for the best. And if you're feeling better 6 months later, oh yeah, you must be better
Correct.
now. Like that doesn't work for me. We really need to have more evidence-based approaches,
Right.
also known as data-driven approaches. And so I used to retest every 3 months so that I could see the frequency. And we started collecting data and seeing patterns in how long does it take to get rid of mold. How
Mhm.
long does it take to get rid of mold if you're using this protocol versus this protocol, right? How long does it take to get rid of mold if you also have heavy metals and you've got chemicals and you've got parasites and you've got leaky gut and you've got all these other things going on? And how long does it take, to get rid of, if you have a combination of root causes going on, which, by the way, Caroline, we have seen in our data. I don't know if you've heard of this before. We've actually been the ones collecting the data and teaching about it, is that when people are chronically ill with whatever symptom, condition, or disease, or combination of symptom conditions and diseases that they have, we find that 90% of them, it's actually over 90%, have at least high levels of three environmental chemical toxins.
Mhm.
70 to 75% of them have at least one high level of a toxic mold, and 20 to 25% of these chronically sick people have at least one high level of a heavy metal or radioactive material in their body. And most of the time, they have a combination of these things going on.
Mhm.
And so collecting all of this data has been just really a big game. It's been a really big game changer in the world of education and empowerment for people out there who are struggling.
Yeah, it's amazing. The body's like really resilient. I always say like the body can handle a lot, but when you start to see people who have chronic disease, it's massive insults. It's not just one thing. And I have and we can talk about mold for a little bit because I really though look, I've been doing mold. We were talking prior to coming on the call that I've been in this industry 24 years investigating homes for mold. I've seen over 30,000 houses. And it makes my skin kind of curl up a little bit when everybody starts saying it's just mold, it's just mold. I definitely have mold because I have clients who come to me and like, let's talk about this story because I think it's really profound. So I had a client come to me and they had seen their doctor and their doctor said, look, you definitely have a mold problem. Like you're showing up with mycotoxin in your blood work. Like we're completely convinced. And so they went out seeking environmental inspectors to try to find out where their mold problem was coming from. And they finally ended up with me and they said, look, we've been through a bunch of inspectors, like we need to know. So I went through their house, with a fine tooth comb looking for mold. And did they have a little bit of mold? Sure, they did. In a corner, they had some by a duct. Did we fix it? Yeah. Did I think it was ever causing their problem? No. Not to the fact that their whole family was sick, that they were chronically sick. They had all kinds of autoimmune issues. And I said, look, I think something's really going on here. And they're like, well, my doctor says I have mold. And this goes back to that patient relationship we're talking about. The doctor says one thing, and then there isn't any room for error in that model, right? So I basically said, look, I really don't think this is your problem. I'd like to investigate some other things. And so they said, no, we really think it's mold. So they went back to their doctor. Doctor said it was mold. They came back to me again and they said they wanted to retest their home. And I said, look, I'm not going to take your money. This is not your issue. It's not mold. I bet my career on it, 24 years. And I said, I'd like to do some investigation. And I finally talked them into doing just simple things. I wanted the gas company to come out, which is a free thing to do. It doesn't cost any money to check to see if they had gas leaks or carbon monoxide. Sure enough, the gas company comes out, shuts the house completely down, and says, look, every single joint throughout your gas network in your home is leaking. And this was causing a chronic exposure of all kinds of petroleum products and everything else that leaches out from when you have a natural gas leak. And the daughter was really sick. She ended up going back to school. She was able, after we fixed the problem. And then they had also high volatile organics in their home, like off the charts. So my point is that, a lot of things get labeled as one thing, and mold is sort of that. Right now, it's that hot topic, I call it. I'm holding my fingers up in quotes again, but that hot topic where everybody just wants to say it's this. But in reality, when you look at all of these issues, even with mold, it's multifactorial.
And that's exactly what we teach too. So many practitioners out there or experts, they're all dialed in with blinders on, going, it's mold, it's always mold, or it's heavy metals, or
Mhm.
it's a leaky gut, or you've got parasites. And I'm like, you know what? It's very likely you've got all of it going on. And if you haven't tested for it, and you're not using a data driven objective, measurable way or approach to figure out
Yes.
why you're sick.
Mhm.
And so, we see so many people coming to us who, they're like, well, my last doctor tested me for mold and but I'm still sick. And I'm like, okay, well, how long have you been on this mold protocol? Oh, I've been on this mold protocol for 3 years. And I'm like, well, it
Exactly.
takes
It's
an
not
average of
working.
9. Yeah, it's like it takes an average of 9 months to get mold out of your body. And so, have they done any retesting on you for the mold? No, they haven't retested yet. Okay. Did they test you for anything else besides mold? No, they only tested me for mold. So I'm so glad that you're
Mhm.
bringing this up because sometimes I feel like it's just me saying it. But now the audience is getting to hear from someone else saying the same thing. It's like, and it makes sense. If you're not feeling well, let's give a different example for any of us that have had older cars nowadays are so high tech, right? We don't have the same problems with cars that we used to have. But a friend and I, we were laughing the other day because when we were growing up, it was normal to carry power steering fluid in your trunk, a couple of little bottles of oil,
Yeah.
and you know what I'm saying? And if you had a
Yeah.
radiator leak, you carry some gallons of water in the back of
Water.
your trunk. It was like a normal thing because older engines, right? But
Yeah.
if you have an engine problem, you're not just going to open the hood and only look at the spark plugs. Like no, you do a complete assessment. You look at everything. You're looking at
Right.
transmission function, you're looking at engine function, spark plugs, the starter, you're you're looking at the gaskets to make sure they're not leaking. Like you're looking at everything under the hood. And so the same approach needs to be taken for humans. If you're sick, you could have a variety of different things going on. And
Absolutely.
if you're not looking at all of it, then you're not taking a data driven approach that's going to work. And if you've been sick and your doctor has only done one test or is only looking in one or two directions and isn't looking at everything, then it's very, very likely that you're not going to come out with the outcomes that you're looking for.
And a lot of these things too are like long-term exposure. Like, so we're talking about, let's just talk about radon, right? This is something that people think that we've mastered. Like somehow the EPA has put out standards. We say, look, you have to be less than 4 picocuries in your home. It's done. Like everyone tests. Unfortunately, if you really research into it, it is not required in real estate to test for radon. Most people aren't. Most of the systems people have in place for radon, so this is mitigation systems. You probably go into your basement, you see a fan, right? That's supposed to mitigate out the radon. They're not working, they haven't been maintained, and they're not even doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if you have changes, and I think you're kind of right on the border of earthquake country, but when you're out in the West, if you have any kind of seismic activity and change in that rock under your home, that can immediately change your radon level. Now, radon has been linked to long-term exposure, right? So we're talking about lung cancer. It's the second leading cause of lung cancer in the country, first among non-smokers. So we've got that issue to contend with. There is also a doctor, and this is new information coming out. It hasn't even come out yet, but I found out from someone else in the field that they're actually linking now radon to stroke, which is going to be coming out soon, which is amazing. And then on top of it, radon is ionizing radiation. And this is the same type of radiation you get from x-rays, right? And we know if you go get an x-ray, at least I do, you ever get a headache after, you feel lethargic, you feel tired, especially if you get a big CAT scan. Well, what do you think ionizing radiation would do to you in radon form? So to say that it's just a long-term exposure, I've seen too many clients have very odd symptoms and autoimmune disease. It lowers your immunity, that ionizing radiation all the time against your body. So if you have radon, this is basically lowering your immunity and making you susceptible to all kinds of things. So this is something that just almost you go in every 50 state, somebody's got radon. So it's just sitting in your house all the time, exposing you to it, and you sleep in there. Even if you're in the house only 8 to 10 hours a day for sleeping, and then you go to work, you're still in there exposed to it for a long duration of time.
Yeah, and isn't there a bigger issue also in homes that have uh, basements
Yeah.
where there's living quarters versus
Mhm.
walkout basements are supposed to be safer in terms of the whole radon thing. We're building a house right now, and we're getting some sort of. I know we're doing something. I don't remember what it is, but we added something to the house to make
Probably
sure.
mitigation. Yeah, it's a fan. Usually it's a fan,
Yeah,
a passive fan, and
yeah,
it pulls out from under that slab. So it really doesn't matter whether you have a slab, a crawl space, a basement. That radon, the closer you are to the ground, like so even if you have a walkout, it just comes up to the first floor now versus coming up to the basement. But either way, that radon finds its way in. And so what they do is they put a fan system, like you were talking about, to pull that air pressurization to pull it out from under instead of it going up into the home. The problem is that if you have HVAC systems and other things that can put a draw or pull on that space too, so you have two things pulling at the same time, if one's stronger, it'll pull the radon out regardless of you have the mitigation. So that's why I recommend with people looking at just any kind of ionizing radiation in the home, uranium, alpha and beta, gross particles, all of that stuff has to be, I put a continuous monitor in there so I can see like what's going on day to day because I know that what we are using doesn't necessarily always, fix the problem.
yeah. You know, since we're talking about these radioactive type of materials, we've noticed other types of radioactive materials on the toxin bundle test that we do with people. We've noticed a couple of different ones showing up. Can you talk about other ones? Like what about cesium or cesium? I'm not sure if I'm saying that properly,
Yeah.
but we're seeing that. And we're seeing thallium also showing up. Isn't that also a
Mm.
radioactive material?
Yeah, a lot of it can come in from the rock, like the rock formations under the ground.
Okay.
And if you have a well, like, so it depends what you have. Like a lot of people have municipality water, right? You need to know where your water is coming from. This is huge because people ignore water. Like water is like considered like the last thought. Not only is your skin your largest bodily organ, which we all know, and you're always bathing or showering in the water, but depending on where your water comes from. So if you have a well, for example, like I do, I mean, I live in outside of New York City, but I have a well, believe it or not, in New Jersey. And so you're responsible for testing that. Nobody tests your water for you. And even when municipalities do it, they're not looking for these types of things like radioactive.
Well, the
So
EPA standards for our water cleanliness are just horrible.
low. They're
They're
low. Like
horrible. Yeah.
they're just like they're baseline. Like we know with radon, EPA says 4 picocurie. We know at 2 picocurie that that's going to be causing enough to cause cancer. But when they set these standards for the audience, they're setting them so that we can easily meet the parameter. Like they're trying to at least get to a certain point. And that's not so bad, right? I mean, but you want to know that just because you're at that point for the EPA, you want to get better. You always want to be better than the standard. It's like building a home. Codes are based to just kind of get the house into place, but you never want to build to code. You always want to build way beyond code.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing too is that the standards for what's acceptable have changed drastically over the years, and I really I see a pattern of the acceptable high limit amounts being correlated to what's being found in the environment, and that's just an easy way to not have to fix the toxin levels that are found
Right.
in
Of
air and
course.
water. It's like just raise the accepted level. And of course, then you end up with all of these chronically sick people, and then we have to go in, you and I, and we have to educate people and let them know,
I know.
there's published research that shows as little as X amount is enough to cause mental health issues. It's enough to cause chronic disease, autoimmune disease, like whatever, cancer, whatever. And then people start raising their eyebrow, and they get upset, and it's like it's actually new news to them. They don't even know.
I think they're safe. I think it's like we've all been kind of, and I hate to use the word brainwashed, but it's brainwashed. I mean, we want to think that someone else is going to protect us and we don't have to worry about it. I mean, I know when you put your head on the pillow at night, and I know when I do too, there's so many worries, and I know how genuine you are and how much you care too. And it's like when you see the big picture, it's scary. It's a lot of burden to put on our shoulders to be like, oh my God, we have to put this message out there. Most people just want to ignore it because it's easier. It's just
Yeah,
easier
yeah.
not see it.
So I wasn't aware that thallium was something that would be found kind of like radon, being able to like come
Yeah.
up and seep in. When I had looked up the common exposures online, which you can't find all the right stuff online anymore either, because especially since 2020, a lot of stuff is being censored, which I find super interesting. A lot of published research that I was able to find previously that I had documented. When I go and click on the links now, you either can't find it or you have to pay for it in order to be able to see it. So it's not readily available to the public. But we had a client whose mother came to us. Her mother was in her 70s, and she was very concerned about her son, who I can't recall now. I think he's in his early 40s, and he was living, currently still is living in the basement, and he had lost complete function of his bladder control. So he wasn't able to control that anymore. He had complete 100% incontinence. He also wasn't communicating anymore. So he had developed like this inability, almost like severe autistic type of symptoms, where he wasn't looking directly into the eyes anymore. He wasn't communicating verbally, so he completely stopped talking. She couldn't get
Mm.
in the shower either. Like he was barely alive living down there in the basement. Had a lot of depression, and it was just super scary. So, and this mother did a beautiful testimonial for us that was very heartfelt and emotional, understandably. But we ended up doing testing on him, and we found a lot going on in terms of toxic mold and different things, but we found extremely high levels of thallium in his body. And when I went in to go and research it, it says that it causes neurodegeneration, severe neurological toxicity. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's got to be what's causing
Mm.
his incontinence and his all of his like autistic type things that he's developed over the years, because he wasn't born with that, right? He had
Mhm.
developed that over time. So we started working with him, getting the toxins out, and eventually he actually recovered. He started showering. He started making new friends.
Mm.
His incontinence completely went away. And when I talked to the
That's
mom,
beautiful. That's
yeah.
amazing.
When I
Mhm.
talked to the mom about 3 or 4 months ago, she said that he had asked his mother for the first time if he could go to some counseling because he had, an online friend that he had made in the gaming world who had recently passed away, and he was feeling a lot of emotions over that. And so he asked his mom if he could go to some counseling. But, this is just one example of the types of things that we're seeing, and so I feel like the education that you're providing is so important, even for practitioners like myself who I wasn't I wasn't able to find where the most common exposures were other than electronics. And here you are telling me that just like just like radon, you can actually have it down in the basement. So this is something now I want to call this mom and have her have the house tested. But if she's going to have the house tested, who does she even call to have the house tested for this kind of stuff?
Well, the first thing too is I would check, I don't know what type of water supply they have, but when we pull a lot of these radiologicals, I test them out of the water because the water is this vehicle. It's not that necessarily they're in the water because it's radiation, right? But it rides that water up through. So when you turn your shower on, for example, like with radon, all of a sudden the radon becomes airborne and you start breathing in high amounts of it because it's followed the pathway. So if it can do it for radon, it can do it for other types of radiation. It's a pathway to a lot of different things. So that's first finding out what your water supply is like, testing your water. That's important. Making sure you're testing in the basement, looking at also stone, like if you have any kind of stone, like we saw women who developed breast cancer because they had granite that had come in with like the purple and blue tones, had high amounts of radiation. It was very strange. We went through a period, I think it was about 10 years ago, where we started to see this relationship because that stone comes in and it's natural and it has radioactive material in it. So trying looking around your place, looking to see if you could potentially have any kind of radioactive material would be really important, because we see a lot of it. And heavy metals as well. We see that in the water, and I mean the water is just filled with. I mean, there's so many things to test for there.
And so if I were going to have my house tested to look for potential radioactive materials, um, do I just do a Google search or
Yeah, I mean, you should. I guess reach out to any environmental inspector and see if they will do it. It's
so it's an
because it's.
environmental inspector
Yeah, you
is
want an
what you're looking
environmental, like that's what I am by trade, right? I'm an environmental consultant.
yeah.
So obviously if we can help, we're in 50 states, we're happy to do it. So we'd love for you to send your clients
Well,
to
then
us.
that's what I wanted to know. Like,
Yeah.
okay, perfect. Because this is perfect. We definitely want to make sure that everybody has your contact information, especially our clients, because that's something that even as practitioners, up until we got to know you, we didn't have anybody to refer to. And so if you're in all 50 states, then that's definitely something that we want to have available for our viewers and for our clients to be able to reach out to you, so that they have someone who can guide them through the whole process of detoxifying their home.
Yeah, and there's so much we can do. Like we invented in particular home test kits for all of our clients because I was couldn't be in the field all the time, right? So in 2005, we developed a mold mycotoxin allergy, that kit that basically tests for all your particulate, your building construction. So we can send you something. You take air samples for us, that comes back to our lab, and then within 2 days we have all the results. So it's super easy for people to do. They can do it themselves, and obviously we guide you and we put you in the right process. We talk to you about what we found, and then what I like to do is refer them to people like you. So once we find these issues, we say, hey, we need to work with a practitioner who's going to understand how to detoxify what we found, and then we work together to get you well. And that's the whole goal. You need the environmental piece mixed with the medical piece to work together, and that's why we're here having this discussion, because nobody does this.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, that's just it's so needed, and such good timing too. I've got another question, and that is, we've touched on mold, and we've also touched on some radioactive materials. Are you finding patterns, like common denominators in like maybe the top 5 toxins that you're finding in people's homes, or is it just kind of spread all over, or are you finding common denominators in certain geographic locations around the United States?
Yeah, that's a good question. Every house is different. I'm going to say that because every occupant's different. So you never find one house that is the same. However, new building construction coming out of, let's say, the late 90s to now, a lot of this engineered lumber is causing problems. We don't know why, but we get a lot of people who will say, I have Lyme symptoms. I think I have Lyme's disease. And maybe they even do test positive for Lyme. But then when I get into the home, I see they're living in this new, tight, energy efficient, synthetic building construction. Can I place exactly what's causing the problem with the materials? I'm not sure. Though I think it's potentially the glues and the resins and how they interact with moisture. They start to outgas a lot. They're not like, so wood is a perfect example. Take a tree. It can be outside. It has naturally occurring formaldehyde. So there's chemical compounds that are in things that are natural. So anytime you build a house, you're going to have something. But that wood can take on moisture and release it back, right? Without getting moldy outside. You see trees do it all the time. When we piece together all this lumber and we call it chipboard, or you ever go by a building, they're building and you see all that, the house is going up and it's this artificial looking, it looks like Swiss cheese wood, right? They're building these homes. That's what we call engineered lumber. When that gets wet, it has a lot of glues and resins and materials that bind it together. It starts to become very odorous. Like you can smell it when you go into these new homes. They have a distinct smell. And I'm not talking new home smell. I'm talking this specific sweet chemical smell. And we get a lot of clients who complain about Lyme's disease. And at the same time they're complaining about Lyme, they're complaining that they smell this odor in their house. What that odor is and how it stays around and doesn't go away is of interest to me. I see a lot of correlations back to people being chronically sick.
I didn't even know that they were starting to use synthetic wood framing to build out houses. I haven't seen that yet.
Oh, I mean, they do this all. I mean, this has been the 90s, especially like in heavily populated areas. Like if you're looking California, they're building with all kinds of MDF. I think you're in Park City, Utah. They tend to out there, from my experience, build a lot better and use more wood, real wood product. However, when you start to get to the bigger areas where land is more expensive, we're going to put it up as cheap as possible.
Yeah.
Now you're into synthetic lumber.
Right. Yeah. Ours is being built with real wood.
Good.
And even with that, I know that they're treating the wood. And, that's something that Greg and I talked about was, getting like overdoing it on the air doctors, like getting more than we need to help with any potential VOCs as the house is off gassing for the first,
Yes,
year or whatever.
sure.
But what would be some suggestions for anyone who's moving into a new house in terms of like, are air doctors going to be sufficient? If you have a 2,000 square foot house and you get enough air doctors for 4,000 square feet, is that going to really help filter out the air and keep it clean? Should we be opening windows as often as possible when the weather's nice? Like, what are some additional things that can be done for these newer builds?
Definitely. So if you're going to do new construction, everything outgasses something. So even if you're using natural wood, formaldehyde is naturally occurring in that wood. So if you're going to build and you cut wood, you're going to have formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen. Even people who live in the woods, this is kind of fascinating. If you live in a house that's in the woods, your level of exposure to formaldehyde is much greater than if you live in an open field. So you're just automatically exposed to that carcinogen naturally occurring. So just because something's natural doesn't mean that it's okay. So we have to kind of, nature throws us a bunch of bones and basically says, hey guys, like I'm going to put some nasty things out there that are natural. These radiologicals we're talking about, radon is completely natural because we weren't meant to live in a house that was closed up on top of land. I mean, really, we adapt to, we put a home to sort of adapt to live in, but we weren't meant to live like that. We were probably meant to live outside. So either way, yes, when you build a new house, you want to obviously ventilate. Make sure maybe you can even install a ventilation system like an ERV or something to help with ventilation because you're going to have a lot of this toxicity coming off. Also, doing bakeouts is really great when you can raise the temperature in the structure just enough to start to outgas some of these lighter chemicals that will come off. So your lighter VOCs and allow them to outgas and then open your windows and ventilate after and do that process for a while. You can also test your VOCs to know exactly what they are. So then you can tell, like if you're at 1,000, let's say nanograms per liter, you'll come down to 500. We have 500 as our safe level. We like to see what 500 nanograms per liter of VOCs. New builds usually tend to be up in the thousands. So like some houses I've seen 6,000, which is really high, right? But you want to test and know where you are and then try to keep reducing your baseline till you get to like a safe level, because every house is going to have an issue. Even if you're building with the best products, you will have outgassing that occurs from just plumbing products, from, toiletries, rubber gaskets, any kind of latex that's used, paints, all of that kind of stuff.
And testing with these, testing for the VOCs is that's you said earlier is a part of your home test kit that you have available?
Yeah, like we have it. We can either do it on location or we can send it to you and you can just open it up. It takes about 3 hours to collect the data. And then it comes back to our lab. And then we have your total VOC number. And then we can actually break down every single chemical compound that's there and tell you like what you're using. Like if you painted, I could tell you, hey, Dr. V, I know you painted. I see all your paint chemicals. I can see you use PVC cement. I can see you used, let's say, naphthalene. Some people are like going crazy with mothballs. We see all this breakdown. And so we can literally tie it back to what you're using. And people find it mind blowing, because like we come into a house and I'm like, don't tell me anything about you. Let me learn. And when I test, I tell people what's there. And it just blows their mind. They're
Yeah.
like, how do you know that? Isn't it
Well,
crazy?
we're definitely gonna reach out to you and have someone come and do it. I would like to document the whole process so that we can provide that for people to get to see how the process
Yeah.
works. If we can get someone to come out and we can talk through it and do all the things, I think that would be wonderful because after all of the work that I did to regain my health many years ago, I'm
You
super
don't want to go
excited.
backwards. You
No,
don't need
I
to.
don't want to go back. Are you
Especially
kidding
if
me?
you're building a new house. Look, anybody who's building a new house, unless you're really doing under the guidance of like a naturopathic
Yeah,
architect, which there are some,
yeah,
unless you're doing that, like you're talking green builds, all of these things are completely toxic. So, and like I said, I'm giving you an example. Like wood has got its own toxicity involved with it.
yeah,
So, but I'm happy to do that for you just as is. So I'll send you like a monitor. We'll stick it in there, and then we'll document it to your audience. Like, look, she was doing this, and we monitor her VOCs, and then you can
yeah.
talk about it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and you know what? Like this house, it's not a greenhouse. We didn't hire an architect to come in and figure out how to create a perfectly green, perfectly like healthy house that would be, $2.5 million or whatever to
Right.
build. Like that's not in our budget, and we didn't do that. We're doing what most people are doing. We got a spec home where we got to make a couple of choices in the neighborhood, and it's a good builder. And when you're looking in terms of the quality of the home, in terms of the finish outs and the quality of the insulation and things, we chose a builder, Ivory Homes out of Utah. That's their number one builder, and I know that there are going to be things that we're going to need to mitigate. And so I'm just, going to be really looking forward to going through that process and mitigating it because absolutely I want to keep myself healthy. I do
Yes.
want to get,
Yes.
and it's exciting to get to have a new home. I've never lived in a new home. I'm going into my mid 50s and I've always lived in older places and
Yeah, me
um
too.
and and if I've lived in something newer, it's been, like high-rise apartments in downtown, beautiful like downtown Denver, downtown Austin, whatever. But definitely want to do that. And yeah, let's absolutely document this process so that we can, share it with your viewers and with my viewers and can get an opportunity to
And keep you safe. That's the most important. Like we don't want
see the
you we
processes.
don't need you going backwards. And these products that we use, like when you do a new build, I think if you go into it realizing that it is a toxic experience, like I don't care how you build,
Yeah.
you're gonna have these pitfalls. So just be able to, like I said, do bake outs, make sure you're baking it out. Don't go in there when it's new. Like if they just did PVC cement and you've got all these aerosols and caulk and everything else, you don't need to be in there. It just goes right into your bloodstream and then your body's got to detoxify it. So giving
Yeah.
yourself some time,
Yeah.
make sure that it outgasses.
So, talk to me about these mothballs. What are you talking about? People go crazy with mothballs
Oh,
because I think those are
yes.
the absolute worst smelling things. I will never use them just because they smell absolutely repulsive. So, tell me what's going on with the whole mothball story.
Yeah, like so people use mothballs to deter mice. And we see a lot of this, like we see it with people who are snowbirds, like they're going to leave their house for the winter and they're going to go down to Florida, they're going to go down to Texas and then come back and they just laid in their home with mothballs. They are carcinogenic. They have what's called naphthalene in them. And naphthalene is equivalent to diesel fuel. Diesel fuel is also made out of naphthalene. So are you going to go bathe yourself in diesel fuel? No, it's a carcinogen. Like why would you do that with mothballs? So this is a really bad habit that people get into the habit of using like them to deter rodents and mice, don't do it. Like it's just we are more educated now. Like, do not use mothballs.
Yeah. And so what can people use instead?
It's hard. I mean, you wanna keep things really clean. I always come back to that, and I know it sounds, like, really, simple, but you need to make sure that you don't have a lot of things that are gonna draw mice in to begin with. Make sure all the holes around the house are sealed up, and then if you really wanna get a little creative, they don't like peppermint, so you can kinda go a little crazy with peppermint, but it's still a VOC. Remember, these natural essential oils are volatile organic compounds. Remember I said natural is not always healthy. It's just because something's green. I mean, look, we've had things in nature. We have black widow spiders. We have all kinds of venomous insects. We have, like I said, with wood, we've got formaldehyde. So just because something's natural doesn't mean it's okay. Eucalyptus is natural to VOC. Citrus is natural. It's a volatile organic. Your body can't tell the difference. So if you load it up with something just because it's natural, doesn't mean your body's going to not have to detoxify it and like it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, mice can be an issue, but I agree with you. If you don't have things in the house, you don't leave things in the house that the mice are going to want, you're going to have much less of a problem. Like you may still have one or two coming in the wintertime. We find that too out in the current house that we're in Utah. One I caught one this year. They're so cute. I'm not afraid of these any of these animals. I actually find them kind of cute. I just don't want them in my house. But
No, and you don't. Like, I have so many
yeah,
clients that go, I don't wanna kill them." I said, "Listen, they carry hantavirus,
yeah,
they carry lots of bacteria,
yeah,
you can get very sick from mice, and they also create mold problems. So, like, you don't want them in your home. Like, I don't
exactly,
care how cute they look. I've made the mistake.
exactly.
I know I had one in my shed and I didn't kill it, and then I had 50 before I
And
knew
then you
it.
have
So
50, yeah. And so one of the things that we do, and we do this for our RV as well, is we make sure that any food is in an airtight hard plastic or glass container. We prefer glass, but some of the things it's hard to find glass, like a tall container that might hold like your pasta, your gluten-free pasta, by the way, the
nice.
gluten-free spaghetti, but things that seal tight so that mice cannot get into those things. And we do that in the house. We also do that in the RV. In particular, like we've had the RV in storage for 6 months. We're picking it up tomorrow so that we can get it ready to take the grandbabies out on the
Oh,
peninsula up here in the Pacific Northwest. We're going to take them camping in the RV, but we make sure that we either remove the items completely or we have them in air sealed airtight so that the mice can't get in, because as soon as
that's
one mouse finds something like a box of cereal or a box of rice or flour that they can get into, then all of a sudden you've got 50 mice in your house. And so the
completely.
best deterrent, I think, is making sure that they don't have anything. So if they do get in the house, they see that there's nothing there for them, and
Yes.
you can best take care of it
And
like that.
they even like makeup. I had one get into my office and I noticed I had the beeswax lip balm and my beeswax lip balm was across the room. And I'm like, how did it get there? It was one single mouse that carried this lip balm and it could smell it and it took it. So like you're saying, if they get any whiff of something that they want, they're in. But get rid of them. Don't they cause so many problems I can't even tell you, from virus to disease to mold. Their feces as it breaks down. We've seen houses with high levels of mold where they didn't have a moisture problem. We couldn't figure it out. It was coming from my species. So
Wow.
ixnay on the keep them out.
Let's talk about. I want to circle back to mold for a minute because um, most people have the misconception that only areas with higher humidity are susceptible to having mold. And I would like the audience to hear from you on this, because we teach them, if we find mold in their body and they're coming to us and they're sick, they're looking for answers. We tell them not only to have their house tested. We mentioned that earlier in today's interview, but we also tell them, you could have been exposed to this mold when you were a child, when you were in college, living in the dorms, when you were younger, and it could have been in your body for decades. So we don't know yet
Mhm.
if this was previous exposure or if this is exposure in your current home. And if we have someone who lives in the high desert, or Colorado, Utah, Arizona, for example, their first response is, "Well, I live in a dry area. I know I don't have mold." Or we've even heard stories. We've even heard people come back and tell us, "Well, I just built this house a year ago, and I live in the high desert. I live in Colorado where it's super dry. I don't have mold." We actually had an attorney who came to us very, very sick, who had a friend of his who was a builder in Colorado build a brand new multi-million dollar home, and he would not have his house tested. He refused because he said, "There's no way. I live in a dry area. This is a brand new home. And I have a friend who's a builder who built it." Well, 9 months later, which we retested at 5 months, and then we retested again at 9 months, and the mold was not gone. It was decreased, but it was not gone. And our research shows that we can get rid of mold out of the body in an average of 9 months. And the pattern was not looking right. And I asked him again, I said, "Did you have your house tested?" And he's like, "No." And I said, "I think it's time for you to have your house tested." So he ends up having his house tested. And sure enough, there was behind one of the walls, there was condensation on the pipes. And, because it was behind the wall and insulated, then there was moisture building up in the air between the walls, right? And they ended up having to tear down a huge section of the house. It ended up in a lawsuit, just all this other stuff. But I would like for you to talk about your experience with this, because it's really hard to convince people, if they're living in a dry area, to convince them to spend the $600 or $700 or whatever it is to have their house tested for mold. But at the end of the day, if they don't do it, they're ending up wasting time and money on their own health, because they'll end up doing a detox that doesn't
Exactly.
work. Yeah.
Yes, it's in all 50 states. It doesn't matter where you live. I've seen it in Southern California, and it's just like Dr. V's explaining. When you get a cold surface, so in Southern California, they changed building code because of fires. So they used to have wood roofs. You remember, you'd always see like the shingled roof, right? Beautiful. Well, they said, "Oh, this is a fire hazard. If we get an ember that goes onto the wood, then we'll get a fire. And so we can't have that anymore. Let's go to asphalt roofs, which are those shingles that we talk about that are made from petroleum." So what happened was, because they changed roofs in Southern California, and especially like in Los Angeles area, that attic space stopped breathing. So it used to contract and expand with wood, right? Wood's natural, goes like, makes this, I'm making my hands for people don't see, but an open and closing motion where it will contract and expand with heat. Well, asphalt doesn't do that, stays tight. So now we have cold air conditioned space down in the house because it gets very hot in Southern California. And then you have a hot attic space here. So cold meeting hot. And guess what? The ceiling started condensing. You hit dew point, and all of these registers for HVAC, you have all your vents that are in the ceiling started to contract water and started to drip. And they got mold because of this change in building structure that they recommended. And now things weren't breathing, and you had these two differentials in temperature. So that's in Southern California, warm place. Arizona, they get rainy seasons. Like you talk about certain times of year where the rain comes in. Well, they're not equipped to deal with it. So what happens? It can build under your slab. It can come up through the slab moisture. And we've seen people like complaining about musty smells going on these slabs. And we're like, this is so strange because they don't have any water under there. Well, during certain seasons, they do. And the ground can't handle the saturation because it's so dry. It bounces it up under the slab. And then you get that cold, damp slab, hot air of an Arizona day meeting, and you condense and they start to get mold. So this can happen anywhere. And then air conditioning, forget it. Anytime you have an air conditioning unit, I don't care what part of the country you live in, Texas, Florida, Arizona, Nevada, those air conditioning systems are all condensing in there, and it's a water source, and they leak. Cold and hot meeting, air temperature meeting, and they can get all moldy and disgusting. So it doesn't matter where you are. There isn't a place where you are not going to see it.
So, in the case of the HVAC systems, if that's happening everywhere, I mean, let's face it, there are some areas where we have to use the air conditioning. Like
Of
if
course.
there's no
Have to.
option for that, and then when the winter comes, we need to switch it over to heat. So, what's the best mitigation approach for that?
Yeah, so Florida, we talked about areas where there's big problems. Florida, if you've ever gone to Florida and any part of Florida and you go into a hotel or you go into, rents a space or you go and get a vacation home, it smells like mold in almost every home. It's a very big problem. And that's because, again, Florida is prone, when we're talking like, say, Central Florida to Northern Florida, you get cold spells where those concrete buildings get cold. And then all of a sudden you get this hot day, right? We come out of like maybe it's 50 degrees and that block gets cold, whole house gets cold. Then we get a hot day that comes in. Those two temperatures meet and the entire building starts to sweat. And guess what? Now you've got moisture and it starts to grow mold on the walls. And this is very typical in Florida. Also, air conditioning units are running all the time. So you have to be servicing your air conditioning units 2 to 3 times a year if you live in these places where you're using central air all the time. You've got coils, you've got a drip pan in there that can get clogged up with all kinds of calcium deposits. So as you make air conditioning, you get water that comes off your air conditioning, and people may or may not know this, and that has to drain away. If that gets clogged up, it'll overflow your pan, and then you'll get all kinds of mold growing in your air conditioning. Also in your ductwork, if it's not sealed, they're using a lot of flex duct now, this cheap plastic ducking. So you get all kinds of stuff growing in there. I find most of the units in Florida after 4 or 5 years, if you don't service them, they're done. They've got to be replaced.
Wow. And so what about if you're in any other area of the country? Because you're saying that all of these HVAC units and all the ventilation is eventually going to get mold no matter where. So like, what do we do about that? Do we have in other parts of the country, and like if we're having it serviced on a regular basis, is that going to prevent it? And what does the
Yep.
service look like? Are they cleaning the ducts? Because I mean, like, how is
Yep.
this being done?
Yeah, so both. Definitely cleaning ducts is a must. And actually, at our summit, it's a good plug because we're all part of it. And you're speaking there too. So this is a great plug for our summit, the My Healthy Home Summit, which is happening Earth Week, April 22nd through the 28th. This is a great time to talk about it because we teach you all these steps there. Every one of these things we're talking about, there is somebody there to teach you about how to clean your ducts, making sure your ducts are clean, making sure you're servicing your HVAC, and making sure that drip pan we're talking about, if you do these things, you will lengthen the longevity of your system, and you will make sure that you're not going to get mold growth. You want to always have someone examining it, making sure there's no mold happening in there. And if you do start to get an issue, you replace the duct work. I like going with all metal ducts. We talk about that in the summit, but maybe we can talk about that because you talked at the summit too, and we were so happy to have you as one of our speakers because you're amazing.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I think that you're amazing with what you're doing. I mean, this is a lot of information that that is good for even me because I'm limited in my knowledge on the side of the work that you're doing. I'm very educated with it, of course, on the side of how it's affecting the human body and the mind and how it affects hormones and how it
Right.
creates autoimmune diseases and all of that. But understanding what in the heck are we supposed to do with our homes so that we can maintain them, keep them as clean as possible. I didn't even know about having them serviced on a regular basis, that was necessary in order to prevent mold. So I mean, that's something that I'm going to want to dive into more as well.
Yeah, and what I do on my inspections, and I'm one of the few people in the country that does this, and this is why I think, it's about being thorough. It's the same thing that you do. I'm just doing it on the home side, right? You're doing
Yeah.
it on the body side. And that's why our synergy is so amazing. But on the home side, I'm taking cameras and putting them inside the ductwork. I work with professionals, like we're a team, like we don't all like work silo. We have basically, I have a huge team I work with of different professionals, and that's what you need, right? And so we actually put cameras inside your duct, and I call it the colonoscopy of your home, but look through those ducts to see what's in there. And you'd be surprised. There's dead raccoons, there's dead mice, there's dead rats, there's chicken sandwich from Burger King, there's chicken sandwich from McDonald's. When they
But the
build your
builders,
house,
yeah.
oh, they throw down whatever Slurpee. I mean, if you want to, it's so funny at the summit. If you want to hear one of the most entertaining talks, listen to Chris Gray talk about being a duct cleaner for 30 years. And when people say, no, you don't need to have your ducts cleaned, you'll hear his talk and it'll blow your mind because absolutely you do. There's like every construction debris known to man in your ductwork.
Yeah, that's just so gross.
It's gross.
That's just so gross. Well, talk to us a little bit about this summit that you've put together, because we're going to be sharing the link to your upcoming summit to all of our listeners. When is it airing again?
So it'll be Earth Week. So the first day, which is Earth Day, April 22nd, which is right around the corner. And it will run for 7 days until the 28th. So each day we'll have seven speakers. talking about the first day, we talk about monitoring what a healthy home is, why you need to have a healthy home. And then we get to the end where I think you're on day 8, where we bring in the medical professionals saying, like, look, these things we're finding in our homes and how they correlate back to our health, which is a big important part. That, yes, these are carcinogens. Yes, these are endocrine disruptors. Yes, these are messing with our genetics and epigenetics. So, why our homes are so crucial. And, look, people spend a lot of time in their homes. And now more than ever, we're all working from our home and spending, if not all of our time. And who's checking that for you? You don't have a building maintenance person doing your home. You're responsible.
It's true. We are responsible, aren't we? At the end of the day, we're the ones who are responsible for our health and vitality. So it's definitely worth taking the time to learn all of this type of stuff. And I want to invite all of our viewers to definitely go in and watch this, because this is unlike any of the other summits that we have had available for us to promote and give to you as an important resource. And I just, if you're going to watch any throughout the entire year, I think this is probably one of the most important educational summits that you can watch, because if you are sick and you have tested, you already know that you found a lot of different various toxins in your body. Now you can take it one step further and really get a much better understanding um, around how you uncover where you're getting exposed in your home, and then most importantly, what steps you can take to mitigate it. And so thank you, Caroline, so much for taking the time to jump on. This has probably been one of my most fun podcasts that I've
Yay.
done, simply because um, you know the intersections of the work that we're doing. This is really going to move the needle for people who are sick. It's really going to move the needle for people who have kids who have been sick and the parents can't figure out why. And it's been new information for me too. Every time I get on a call with you, it's brand new information. So thank you so much for joining. I can't wait to have you back again.
I'm
And
so excited to work together, and we're gonna get all of our patients well so they can come to you, and then we'll test their homes and vice versa, and you guys will be on your way. You shouldn't be sick. If you wake up every day and you have a stuffy nose, you have headaches, you have fibromyalgia, you just don't feel well, and you've been to the doctor and they say, you're healthy, check your home. You'll be surprised.
you've got to check the home. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to make sure that we share the link for your upcoming summit. And I look forward to having you back again. I'll reach out to you, and we'll come up with maybe a little series that we can do together, so that we can dive deep into some of these different issues, so that we can be able to help people together. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Talk
Bye,
to you
everyone.
soon.